Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. It all started at the beginning of July last year. I had just finished high school, but to be honest, I wasn't the best student by any measure. I had spent most of my time hanging out with friends rather than studying, and as a result, college was out of the question. Not that I cared much. At the time, I wasn't focused on higher education. I just wanted a job, preferably one that paid decently. For weeks, I looked for work in the city. I was eager but picky, rejecting jobs at burger joints or convenience stores because I felt they were beneath me. I wanted something exciting, something that paid well. But reality has a way of crushing expectations, and eventually, I had to settle for the first job I could find. Ironically, it was at a famous hamburger chain, exactly the kind of place I'd been trying to avoid. The interview was brief. The manager, a middle-aged guy with an ever-present coffee cup in hand, seemed amused by my nervousness. Before I knew it, I was in uniform, complete with a ridiculous hat, and scheduled to start the very next day. That morning, as I stood in front of the mirror, I wondered how my life had taken this turn. But I had no choice. Bills wouldn't pay themselves. I arrived half an hour early, hoping to make a good impression. The manager greeted me with the same too-wide smile he'd worn during the interview. "Good morning," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. His cheerful demeanor only made me question my life choices more. After a quick introduction, he led me to the back and started explaining my duties. My first assignment? Making fries. It sounded simple enough, and I thought to myself, how hard can it be? The smell of grease and salt was overwhelming, but tolerable. As the morning progressed, I got into the rhythm of frying, salting, and serving, all while trying to keep up with the growing line of customers. The first few hours passed uneventfully until a particular customer caught my attention. He was an older man with scruffy hair, tattered clothes, and a beard that made him look like a lion. He walked with a slight limp, his eyes scanning the room like he was searching for someone. "Who's that guy?" I whispered to a coworker. "Oh, him. He's harmless," she replied. "He comes in every day, orders fries, and then just throws them away. He's just looking for cash to get drunk." When he reached the counter, he locked eyes with me and barked, "Gimme some fries." Startled, I froze. His voice was gravelly, almost a growl. My manager intervened, trying to de-escalate the situation. The man refused to budge until security arrived and escorted him out. As he was being dragged away, he turned back, his eyes boring into mine. It wasn't just anger, it felt personal. The look reminded me of the bullies I'd faced in school, and a chill ran down my spine. The rest of the day passed in a blur. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted. My feet ached from standing all day, and I just wanted to collapse into bed. The next day I returned to work, trying to shake off the uneasiness from the previous encounter. But my peace didn't last long. A few hours into my shift, the same man returned. Chaos erupted. Security was called immediately, but before they arrived, the man pointed a finger at me and shouted, "Watch your back, new guy, I'm gonna get you. You'll pay in blood." The venom in his voice sent a shiver through me. Even after he was escorted out, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. My coworkers tried to lighten the mood with jokes. "Maybe he has a phobia of you," one said, patting me on the back. But their laughter didn't help. I felt like I was being hunted. That evening, as I stepped out into the parking lot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The lot was eerily quiet, and every shadow seemed to move. I hurried to the bus stop and got on the first bus home. But even there, the uneasiness followed me. The air felt thick, and a foul smell surrounded me, like something rotting. When I finally reached my front door, I fumbled with my keys, eager to get inside. That's when I felt it, a hand grabbing my shoulder. Before I could react, I was yanked backward and thrown down the steps. My head hit the ground hard and my vision blurred. "Now I've got you," a voice growled. It was him. the man from the restaurant. He pinned me down, his foot pressing against my chest. I struggled, trying to scream, but the weight on my chest made it impossible. His face was twisted into a grotesque grin, and his breath smelled of alcohol and decay. Summoning all my strength, I managed to push his foot off me. I scrambled to my feet, but he was faster. He tackled me to the ground, raining down punches. Each blow felt like a sledgehammer, and I could feel my strength fading. My ears rang, and the world around me started to blur. Just when I thought it was over, a voice broke through the chaos. "Hey, leave him alone." It was my neighbor, running toward us with a baseball bat in hand. The man hesitated for a moment, then turned his attention to my neighbor. Without warning, he pulled out a knife and lunged at him. What followed was a chaotic blur. My neighbor and the man wrestled on the lawn, the knife flashing in the moonlight. I tried to help, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Blood splattered the grass as they fought, and I feared the worst. Finally, the man let go and fled into the night, disappearing before the police arrived. My neighbor collapsed beside me, clutching a deep wound in his side. "I'm fine," he muttered, though the growing bloodstain on his shirt said otherwise. The ambulance arrived quickly, and we were both rushed to the hospital. My injuries were minor compared to his, but the fear lingered. The police took our statements, but there wasn't much they could do. The man had vanished without a trace, leaving only a trail of blood behind. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Every shadow felt like him, every stranger's gaze a threat. I quit my job at the restaurant and avoided the area altogether. My neighbor recovered, though he bore a scar as a permanent reminder of that night. As for the man, he was never caught. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for another chance. All I know is that I'll never let my guard down again. Life can change in an instant, and sometimes the monsters we fear are all too real. Working at Taco Bell may seem like a normal customer service job, but I swear it's a very different experience. This is where the strangest things tend to happen, and we've always had our fair share of craziness. Let me tell you about one of the scariest ones I remember. It all started one Wednesday night at Smithfield's Taco Bell, which isn't the biggest in the world, but isn't your typical neighborhood joint either. On weekends, the place is packed to the last minute, but on weekdays it's a different story. That night everything was especially quiet. Maybe it was because it was the end of the month and most people hadn't yet been paid, or maybe because of the holiday the day before, which had everyone tired and wanting to be at home. Who knows? The truth is, we had no customers. So, when this guy came in, I was surprised. There were only 2 of us employees, and we were about to close, my partner Ian and me. Ian had gone out to take out the trash, and I was getting ready to close the register. So with this guy coming in, I had to take over, taking his order and also cooking it. The guy looked normal, a little distracted, but I figured that was typical. Who doesn't get a little distracted at that hour? I decided to take his food to the table, which wasn't necessary, but hey, we were alone, and it never hurts to make a nice gesture. Ian came back and gave me a knowing look, as if to say he wanted to leave and couldn't until the place was clean and the customer was gone. We were chatting quietly when suddenly everything got weird. The guy started yelling like crazy. "What the hell is this? This is rotten. Everything is rotten." He was referring to his taco, the fries, and even the soda he had ordered. At the time, I thought he was totally crazy, but I went over to see what was wrong. Then he said, "Try this. The ingredients are rotten." Truth be told, I couldn't believe what he was saying. I tried the taco I had brought him and, surprise, it was great, perfect, fresh and delicious. I even went out of my way to make it good. What was he talking about? I was rather surprised at how good it was because I am not a great cook. "This is not rotten, sir. It's perfectly fine," I replied as I continued chewing. But then the guy got worse, yelling at me that I was crazy for enjoying spoiled food. "Are you sick? You disgust me," he said. This really got on my nerves. He had gone over the edge, So I replied, "That's enough. I'm not going to let you talk to me like that." And that's when things started to get out of control. The man became enraged, got up from his chair, and approached me. He wasn't particularly tall or strong, but the craziness in his eyes gave me chills. Right there, in that bizarre situation, I realized that I had made a big mistake in challenging him. The atmosphere felt heavy, and truth be told, I was very uncomfortable. I kept thinking about how I was going to handle this situation in the best possible way. But the guy looked like he was about to foam at the mouth, and in the blink of an eye, he grabbed the Coke off the table with force. "You like this crap? Take it. It's all yours." In an instant, he grabbed my neck and pushed me against the table, and with his other hand, he tried to shove the Coke into my mouth, pressing it down hard. Suddenly, I began to choke on the liquid that was spilling out and seeping into my nostrils as I struggled to keep my mouth shut. At that moment, Ian, who had already returned, didn't hesitate to jump on the guy and help me. Fortunately, he managed to knock the guy to the ground. But the guy reacted quickly and mounted Ian, starting to punch him in the face nonstop. Seeing this, quick as lightning, I rammed the guy, making him let go of my partner. But instead of joining the fight, I helped Ian up and dragged him to the kitchen. As we ran, the guy got up, more furious than before. But instead of following us, he started yelling like crazy. "Do you think you can make fun of me? That you're going to give me rotten food and get away with it? This is no joke." From the kitchen, we watched as the guy started trashing the restaurant. He smashed the computer, broke the cameras, and even took out the fish tank we had on the counter. He was completely unhinged, out of his mind. As the man continued his rampage through the restaurant, Ian and I decided it was time to call 911. I explained to the police that we needed urgent help. Just then, the guy, after finishing trashing the counter, seemed to have calmed down a bit and was heading for the door. However, although we didn't know it at the time, it was a trap. Seeing him leave, I ran to the broken fish tank to rescue the fish, while Ian frantically searched for the door key. But when I finally placed the last fish in a glass of water, I heard a noise at the doorway. Unfortunately, Ian didn't get to close the door in time. Just as he reached the door to pass the key, the madman appeared again. This time, he didn't open it like when he arrived, but it looked like he had been waiting right there to attack. Ian tried to react, but he fell to the floor. It all happened so fast that I could barely take in what was happening. Before I knew it, I was watching my partner being beaten by that madman with a baseball bat. Consumed with panic, I left the glass with the fish on the counter and ran to help Ian. But I stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the man coming toward me with the bat raised high. Without thinking, I ran into the storeroom and closed the door. Fortunately, I was able to take shelter there, but the guy was on the other side trying to get in at all costs. All he wanted to do was hit me for no logical reason. The scene became even more violent when he started hitting the door with his bat, causing enormous damage to the small metal door. Everything was so chaotic and surreal that I could hardly believe what was happening. Each blow sounded more lethal than the last. I immediately started looking for something to defend myself, a stick, a knife, whatever, but I only found a broomstick that wasn't supposed to be there. Luckily for me, it was. I thought it might do me some good, and just as I was getting ready, the guy kicked the door hard and managed to open it. When he did, he looked for me with his eyes and, without hesitation, lunged at me. I tried to get defensive with the broomstick, but that didn't last at all. In less than 2 seconds, the man lunged at me, completely ignoring that I was going to try to defend myself. Before I could react, he began to beat me savagely with the bat. At that moment, I knew he had lost his mind. The look on his face was terrifying, like a wild animal determined to unleash his unreserved rage. He didn't say a word. He only growled. Each blow he gave me was harder than the previous one. Any attempt to defend myself was futile. At one point, I simply dropped to the ground, covering the vital parts of my body and turning my back to it. He didn't care where he hit me. All he wanted was to keep hitting me. At that moment, I really thought I was going to die. I could hear my bones creaking with each blow. When he hit me in the back, I was out of breath and coughing in pain, feeling like I was going to collapse completely. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. It was Ian, who, although he was also badly hurt, lunged at the man again but failed once more. The madman knocked him down and had every intention of dealing him a fatal blow, but just as he was about to do so, the police siren was heard. At that moment, the guy seemed to come to his senses at the sound. Then his face filled with terror. He didn't want to get caught, so he dropped the bat and ran out the back door. I tried to yell to the police to stop him, but we were both in so much pain we could barely speak. The guy got away, and in the blink of an eye, the cops were with us, asking what had happened. As I waited for an ambulance to be called, I realized that my injuries were almost as bad as Ian's. Although he received fewer blows, he was hit several times in the head. In the end, we managed to recover somewhat, but neither of us went back to work at Taco Bell. We enjoyed the work, but the truth is that after that we were scared to face what happened. The guy who attacked us was never caught or identified. The police only have a video of him trashing the place. No one knows if he was a madman or just a violent sadist, but the truth is he's dangerous, and the people of Smithfield don't feel safe as long as he's on the loose. There is always that fear that he might come back and repeat the madness with other employees. To this day, the thought of him returning haunts me, and I can't walk into a Taco Bell without looking over my shoulder, wondering if he's lurking somewhere, waiting for another chance to unleash his madness. "Can you cover for me tonight?" Mike asked, his usual bright smile lighting up his face. I hesitated for a moment, knowing I had nothing planned, but also knowing how exhausted I already was. I was supposed to leave in about 30 minutes, but if I agreed, I'd be here until the night shift. Mike must have seen my hesitation because he leaned in, his blue eyes sparkling. "Please, you'd be saving my life. I'll owe you one." Hard to resist those eyes. I sighed, nodded, and waved him off as he bolted for the door. Probably to meet his girlfriend, I figured. They'd been together for 3 months, and he never stopped gushing about how amazing she was. Admittedly, I was a little jealous. Not of her, I didn't have a thing for Mike, but of the simplicity of their happiness. Mike and I both worked at a fast food restaurant. He'd helped me get the job a few months ago when I was drowning in bills and desperate for work. My parents were trying to support me through college, but there was only so much they could do. I was on break from classes, so it wasn't like I had anything pressing. Still, I was tired and had hoped to go home, kick off my shoes, and binge-watch something mindless. Instead, I braced myself for the long haul. The evening passed uneventfully. Most of the customers were the usual types: tired parents with kids who wouldn't sit still, teens looking for a cheap hangout spot, and the occasional solo diner. I worked as quickly as I could, eager to get through the shift. By 8:30 p.m., the place had started to empty out. The dinner rush was long over, and the restaurant felt eerily quiet. I glanced at the clock. Only a couple more hours. I sighed, grabbed a rag, and started wiping down tables, hoping to stay ahead of the inevitable mess. That's when the front door opened. I turned, expecting another late-night customer, but froze. The man who walked in was enormous, his broad shoulders practically brushing the doorframe. His face was rugged, with a thick, bushy beard and 3 piercings above his right eyebrow. His eyes, small and sharp, darted around the room before settling on me. Something about him sent a chill down my spine. "Sorry, we're closed," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked around again, as if assessing the place, and then walked to a table, one I had just cleaned, and sat down. "Just need a minute," he muttered. "When you're ready to lock up, I'll leave." I swallowed hard. Something about his demeanor screamed danger, but I didn't know how to argue with a man like that. Instead, I nodded and went back to cleaning, my heart pounding. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched him. He seemed anxious. His leg bounced under the table, and he kept glancing at the door as though expecting someone to barge in at any moment. I tried to focus on my work, but the uneasy feeling in my gut only grew stronger. Finally, I finished the last table and headed toward the back to grab my things. As I passed his table, I opened my mouth to remind him we were closed. Before I could speak, the front door burst open with a loud bang. 2 men stormed in, their voices loud and aggressive. One of them swore violently as his eyes locked onto the man sitting at the table. The other pulled a gun from his waistband and pointed it straight at him. "You thought you could hide?" one of them snarled. Panic surged through me. Before I could think, I ducked behind the counter, my hands trembling as I clamped them over my mouth to stifle a scream. The next few moments were chaos. Shouting, the deafening crack of a gunshot, the sound of furniture being knocked over. I pressed myself against the counter, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I couldn't see what was happening, but I heard every terrifying second. One of the newcomers yelled something about money. The man at the table, the one who had seemed so nervous, pleaded for more time. His voice was high-pitched, desperate. "Please, just a little more time. I'll get it, I swear." "We've heard enough," one of the men growled. The next gunshot was different, final. I peeked over the counter and immediately wished I hadn't. The man who had been sitting at the table was now slumped over, blood pooling beneath him. His eyes were wide open, unseeing. My stomach turned and I fought the urge to vomit. Unfortunately, my gasp was louder than I intended. Both men turned toward me, their eyes narrowing. I ducked back down, cursing my own stupidity. "Who's there?" one of them barked. I didn't wait to find out what they'd do if they found me. My feet moved before my brain fully processed what was happening. I bolted toward the back door, my sneakers slipping on the freshly mopped floor. Behind me, I heard one of them shout, followed by the sharp crack of another gunshot. The sound was so close it made my ears ring. I didn't look back. My only thought was to get out, to find safety. The cold night air hit me like a slap as I burst through the back door. The alley was dark and eerily quiet, but I spotted a group of people standing on the sidewalk about a block away. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Please, help me!" The men chasing me must have seen the group too. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them hesitate before turning and running in the opposite direction. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the sidewalk, gasping for air. "They killed someone," I managed to choke out to the group. "In the restaurant, they've got guns." Someone called the police while another person knelt beside me, asking if I was hurt. I shook my head, too overwhelmed to speak. My entire body trembled as the adrenaline began to wear off. When the police arrived, they moved quickly, securing the scene and checking the restaurant. The man who had been shot was still alive, though barely. Paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher and I overheard one of them say his chances didn't look good. The police took my statement, asking me to describe the men who had attacked him. The details came easily. Their faces were burned into my memory. One was bald with crooked teeth and a mean snarl. The other was taller and lean, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through you. They promised to keep me updated, but also warned me to be cautious. "These men are dangerous," one officer said. "If you see them again, don't engage. Call us immediately." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man being shot, heard the echo of gunfire, felt the terror of being chased. When morning finally came, I called Mike to tell him what had happened. He was horrified, apologizing profusely for asking me to cover his shift. I told him it wasn't his fault, but deep down, I couldn't help wondering if things might have been different if I'd just gone home like I'd planned. I stayed at the restaurant for a couple more weeks, but the fear never left me. Every time the door opened, I braced myself, half expecting those men to return. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I quit, knowing I needed to prioritize my safety and mental health. Even now, months later, the memories haunt me. I've learned to be more cautious, to trust my instincts when something feels off. But no matter how much time passes, I don't think I'll ever forget that night. It changed me in ways I'm still coming to terms with, and I'll never take my safety for granted again. This true story I'm about to tell you happened in Dallas, Texas, and it's one that changed my life forever. After a tiring day at work, my niece Sharon and I decided to stop at a famous taco restaurant. It was one of those chain places that promised quick service and familiar flavors. But that night, it became the setting for something I'd never forget. We opted for the drive-thru since the freezing cold outside made the thought of getting out unbearable. The heat in the car wasn't working well, so we huddled in our jackets, chatting about anything to distract ourselves from the chill. Sharon's laughter was a welcome break from the monotony of the day, and her cheerful voice filled the car. At 18, she was full of energy and optimism, and she had a way of brightening up even the darkest moments. We didn't know that our night would turn so dark, so fast. When it was finally our turn, I rolled down the window and placed our order. 2 supreme tacos without hot sauce, some large chips, and 2 medium sodas. I was careful to be precise, knowing this place often got things wrong. Total is $15.43. Please advance to the next window, the flat voice from the speaker said. As we moved forward, I handed over the money to the cashier. She barely looked up from her phone, sliding the change back to me without a word. Her indifference irked me, but I brushed it off. "Look at that," I muttered to Sharon. "Customer service is dead. When I worked in a call center, I had tough days, but I never treated anyone like that." Sharon chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "Well, let's just hope the tacos are worth it," she said. When we got our order, I decided to park and check the bag before driving away. It didn't take long to see that everything was wrong. The tacos were drenched in hot sauce, the chips were stale, and the sodas were small instead of medium. My frustration boiled over. "This is ridiculous," I said, getting out of the car. Sharon looked worried, but I assured her it would be fine. At the drive-thru window, I tried to explain the mistakes to the cashier. She barely glanced at me, rolling her eyes as if I was inconveniencing her. "All our orders come with salsa," she said dismissively. "If you didn't want it, you should have said so." Her tone was dripping with disdain. "Excuse me?" I said, trying to keep calm. "I did ask for no salsa, and the chips are cold. And these sodas? They're not what I paid for." She laughed mockingly. "If the chips are cold, that's your fault for not eating them in time. And the sodas? You probably confused us with all your weird requests." I was stunned by her rudeness. Before I could respond, another employee joined her. He looked at me with equal hostility. "What's the problem?" he asked, his voice sharp. I repeated my concerns, but his response made my blood boil. "If you don't like it, you can leave," he said. The blatant disregard for customer service was infuriating. I took a deep breath, trying to stay composed. "I'm not asking for anything for free," I said firmly. "I just want what I paid for." "Then leave or I'll call the police," the man shot back. At that moment, Sharon ran up to me, sensing the situation escalating. "Hey, let's just go," she whispered, her voice trembling. But I wasn't ready to back down. This wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. I turned to leave, but just as I did, something unimaginable happened. The manager appeared with a jug of boiling water and threw it at me. The scalding liquid hit my back, and I screamed in agony. The pain was searing, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Sharon and I bolted out of the restaurant, but the employees followed us, laughing and hurling insults. "The fries were cold, but I bet you're feeling warm now," the manager sneered, his voice dripping with malice. The humiliation and pain were unbearable. Sharon was crying, and I was too stunned to react. Other customers watched, some recording on their phones, but no one stepped in to help. We made it to the car, trembling and soaked in boiling water. The burns on my back throbbed with every movement. Sharon tried to help me, but she was shaking so much she could barely function. I managed to start the car and drive us to the nearest hospital. The ride felt like an eternity, the pain overshadowing everything else. At the hospital, the doctors treated my burns and expressed their disbelief at what had happened. They encouraged me to file a police report, which I did the next morning. But when I returned to the restaurant with the police, the employees denied everything. It was only when the security footage surfaced and went viral on social media that the truth came out. The video sparked outrage. People couldn't believe the cruelty we had endured. The restaurant faced a massive backlash, and the owners were forced to shut it down. But the damage had already been done. Sharon was traumatized, struggling to find her voice in the aftermath. She'd always been so full of life, but now she was withdrawn, scared to even speak up in public. The legal battle that followed was long and grueling. I was determined to hold those employees accountable, not just for myself, but for Sharon. She needed to see that justice could be served, that standing up for yourself was worth it, no matter how hard it seemed. The court hearings were painful, reliving the trauma over and over, but I refused to give up. Throughout the process, I focused on supporting Sharon. We started therapy, which helped her slowly regain her confidence. It was a long road, but I could see glimpses of the old Sharon returning. Her laughter became more frequent, her voice steadier. As for me, I've learned that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about fighting back. This experience has left scars, both physical and emotional, but it's also taught me the importance of standing up for what's right. I won't rest until those responsible face the consequences of their actions. This story isn't just about a meal gone wrong. It's about justice, resilience, and the power of speaking out. Life goes on, and I'm determined to ensure that what happened to us serves as a lesson for others. No one should have to endure what we did, and I'll do everything in my power to make sure they don't. My name is Lucas, and I am 38 years old. As a young man back in the 1990s, a wave of horror movies and shows began to invade everything. The fad included a new creepy icon: clowns. Although that trend passed over the years, the sense of dread never went away. I remember one particular cold October night that left me with a clown phobia that haunts me to this day. During that time, my dad and I had a weekly ritual that began when I was 8 and ended in the most terrifying way. Every Saturday morning, he would take me to McDonald's for our father-son breakfast. By 8 o'clock, we were always at our usual table. Everything was like clockwork until one morning when I was about 10 years old. Everything changed. It was a Saturday like any other, and as I got out of the car, the sound of the door echoed. The familiar aroma of fries and maple syrup greeted me, and I ran to the waiting area while my dad took care of the order. But there was something odd about that morning. In the lobby, there was a tall, colorful clown. He wore a bright yellow suit and striped socks that caught my eye. His hair and nose were red, and his face was so white it stood out eerily. His smile seemed exaggerated, and he had huge shoes. All around him, a group of kids were having fun, laughing, and taking pictures with him as flashes from disposable cameras lit up the scene. My dad joined me and pointed me toward the clown. "Hey, do you want to take a picture with him?" he asked me. The clown looked friendly, and he resembled the one who had been at my friend Andy's birthday party. Without thinking, I got up and ran to meet him. When I arrived, the clown had already sat down and was looking at me with his big eyes. The laughter of the children and the bustle of the kitchen filled the air. "Hi, little guy," he said in an exaggerated, almost ridiculous voice. "Do you want to take a picture with me?" He waved his yellow-gloved hand. "Can I, Dad?" I asked excitedly. "Sure," he replied. I walked over to the clown, who motioned for me to climb onto his lap. "Wait a second," my dad said as he went to get the camera. I sat on the clown's lap, who introduced himself. "I'm Ronald," he said with a smile that looked more sinister than funny. "What's your name?" I didn't know what to do. I was conflicted, as my parents always told me not to talk to strangers, so I kept quiet, staring at that clown's smile. I felt tension in the air, something strange in his gaze. After a few seconds, he leaned toward me, bringing his mouth close to my ear, and suddenly whispered, "I'm going to kill you, Lucas." His childish tone was gone, replaced by a deep, guttural growl. My 10-year-old mind went blank. I didn't fully understand what I had heard, except that one of the words he used was very rude and I shouldn't say it. But kill, that word I couldn't even process. Was that a joke? How did he know my name? At that moment, a familiar sound gave me hope. It was my dad returning with the camera. I looked back and saw his smile as he approached. "Well, see you later," I said hurriedly, feeling a shiver run through me and turning my back to the clown, who was just looking at me intently with an unsettling laugh. That night I tried to shake off the discomfort. Something inside me wanted to forget it, but the disturbing interaction had left an imprint I could not erase. Little did I know that would be the beginning of a fear that would haunt me long afterward. I ran upstairs after dinner, excited to play some video games before going to sleep. At 10 p.m., just as I was about to go to bed, I heard a click coming from the window. At first I ignored it, but then I heard another and another. So I walked over to the window, and at that moment, a third stone hit the glass. Looking down, I saw that clown, the one who called himself Ronald, standing in my yard. He was there, waving at me with one hand and gesturing with the index finger of the other, as if inviting me to come down. "Want to play, Lucas?" he growled. His voice was so frightening that I backed up a step. But when I looked again, he was gone. The next week, when I walked into class, my heart sank to see the same clown standing next to Professor Gonzalez, talking to him in front of everyone. Ronald was there, supposedly to raise awareness for a charity. He was smiling and talking in that silly voice that was so strange to me. I thought it was odd that he was alone with the teacher, but I decided to ignore the uneasiness. As I walked out of the class, he stared at me, waving. That weekend, my family decided to go to McDonald's for dinner. I started to get nervous as we pulled into the parking lot. Anxiety washed over me, but to my relief, Ronald was nowhere in sight. We sat down at our usual table and the tension inside me began to ease. But just as our food was being served, I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom. I got up and went to wash my hands. Everything was going fine until something hit my shoe. I recoiled in fright and saw that it was a roll of toilet paper that had slipped from a cubicle. "Excuse me, can you help me?" said a voice from inside. It sounded like an old man, and his laugh made me even more nervous. Slowly, I started kicking the paper closer to the cubicle when suddenly a hand grabbed my ankle from the floor. I screamed in pain as the nails dug into my skin. Before I could react, the hand pushed me away and I fell against the bottom of the wooden cubicle, skidding and screaming. I fell to the ground, and in an instant, I saw who was attacking me. It was Ronald. He was crouched in there, his makeup smeared with blood. He grabbed me. "I told you I'd kill you," he muttered in a low tone. My screams were immediately muffled. I looked at my leg and saw that it was bent in a horrible way. I could no longer move. The clown pulled out a knife and plunged it into my arm. The pain consumed me, but at that moment, I heard my dad yelling my name from the bathroom doorway. However, everything started to go dark. The last image I remember was Ronald raising the knife to hit me again. I woke up hours later in the hospital. I was told I had 2 broken bones and multiple stab wounds. I had lost a lot of blood, but in the end, I was going to recover. It turned out that Ronald McDonald was actually a guy named Rick Dillard, a felon on the run and a registered sex offender. He had been living in hiding and was going out in full disguise to hide his real face. After he was caught, the police found several photos of other children in his apartment, all his possible next targets. I was incredibly lucky to get out alive, albeit with a phobia of clowns, a couple of slashes on my arms, and a deep terror of McDonald's that persists to this day. Even though I've grown up and clowns aren't as popular anymore, every time I think of them, fear and panic come over me again, as if I were 10 years old once more.